Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Sick of It podcast. I don't want to spend too long on the intro so that we can fully get into today's episode, but the Sick of It podcast is going to be everything life and disability. Being disabled or chronically ill affects every aspect of your life, and disabled people are also more than just being disabled. So we are going to explore everything and anything. For the first episode, I spoke to Anja Christoffersen, and we talked all about what it's like being and becoming a model when you have a disability. It was such a good discussion, and I hope you enjoy. So let's pretend like we weren't just talking 5 minutes ago. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm kind of glad that you're my first guest. I feel like it takes the edge off a little bit.
I'm very honored to be your first guest.
Thank you. You're literally the first person I thought of. I think the hard part was trying to figure out what episode topic I wanted to talk to you about, because I think I had about 4 ideas. But I wanted to go with one a bit more unique, something a little bit different. And then maybe later we can talk about that, because I'd love to talk about Champion Health Agency and starting that up, because that would definitely be interesting. But can you give us a brief background on you and your disability?
Yes, so I never really know how to give a background on me as a person because I wear so many hats. But starting with my disability, I think at least is easy. But to people who've never heard of it before, it probably isn't. So I was born with a condition called VACTERL association, and it's an acronym for vertebral, anal, cardiac, tracheal, esophageal, renal, and limb abnormalities that occurs in approximately 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 40,000 births, but some of the conditions can occur in 1 in 50,000 births. So very rare, and a lot of the doctors haven't even really heard of it either. So it affected me in many, many ways, and it was explained to me by my parents as having a plumbing problem. So I wasn't able to get food or water into my body or out of my body when I was born, and had a lot of reconstructive surgeries, starting from 5 hours old, really throughout my life, and spent the first 5 years of my life in hospital or in and out of hospital. And then it's basically been my second home ever since.
Did they diagnose you with VACTERL straight away because it was so rare, or were they just not sure what was going on?
It was really by chance that it was actually diagnosed at 28 weeks of my mother's pregnancy. So one of the parts of actual I had was that there was no join to my stomach. And what that meant was when a baby's in utero, they actually swallow a little bit of the amniotic fluid, or from my understanding, they do. But I couldn't do that. So my mum just grew bigger and bigger and bigger in her pregnancy, and she was growing far too fast. So they did a scan, they saw that they couldn't see my stomach, and that really raised alarm bells. And so they had to bring a specialist in to do a scan, and they thought that I was going to pass away and not even make it through the birth. But then they were able to actually diagnose in utero basically all of the malformations that I had across the VACTERL spectrum, give that diagnosis at birth, and start to prepare a surgical team to operate on me the day that I was born.
And can you kind of run us through like the symptoms, how it affects you day-to-day life?
Yeah, so the V is for vertebrals. So I have hemivertebra, which is like half-formed vertebra, scoliosis, which is curvature of the spine that I've had since birth, missing bones in my sacrum at the base of my spine. So that affects some of my pelvic nerves. And then I also have an extra lumbar vertebra that helped me to be a little bit taller, which is nice. And so that affects me now just in terms of lower back pain, really, and pain throughout my back, to be very honest with you. The A is anal. So I was born with a cloaca, which is just one opening rather than the 3. I had that made into a colostomy and a vesicostomy at birth just to get waste out of my body, and then fully reconstructed. So that affects me now because I have no bowel continence, because there was no sphincter, there were no muscles, there were no rectum. The nerves weren't good, so there was no chance that I could have any continence. As I grew, my urethra wasn't in the right place. I had 2 uteruses, so I had lots of reproductive challenges, and chronic pelvic pain. The C is cardiac. I had a hole in my heart at birth, which was thankfully able to repair itself without any surgical intervention. But I do now have not very good regulation of my heart rate. So that basically affects me because it impacts my mobility. So I can't really necessarily leave the house unsupervised without worrying that I'm going to pass out. And I can't play sports very well. I blame my heart, but it's probably my coordination. And the TE, the tracheoesophageal, so food pipe, air pipe, I had that reconstructed, both of them at birth, because the food pipe was going into my air pipe, not to my stomach. So when they corrected that, they had to cut through where my air pipe was, and they damaged the cartilage. So my air pipe was collapsed into a figure 8. So I struggled a lot with breathing, and I had recurrent chest infections as a child. So I still do struggle with breathing a little bit now. But the main thing really is my swallowing, because they cut through 2 of the big nerves that are responsible for a lot of those contractions. So I have some issues eating. I have to wash down everything when I eat because it's gravity functional only. And so that does cause me some issues. And then the R is renal, so 1 kidney. So I just have to be really careful that I make sure that the kidney's healthy. I have recurrent UTIs, so that can put my kidney at risk. So I just have to catch them early. And then the L for bacterial is limb, so I don't have that, which is, I guess, good.
At least you missed out on one, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, with the surgery, was that like a general risk that could happen, or was that a mess up on someone's part?
So I've had, I guess, many surgeries, but the one where they cut through both the nerves, I was only, just born. I was 5 hours old at the
Yeah.
time. So, operating on an infant is so challenging and highly complex surgery. So I guess the nerves, they're not supposed to be cut through, but it was probably really, really difficult not to cut through those nerves. And I only found out about it 2 years ago. So I've lived most of my life without knowing. I always knew that I couldn't swallow well. I always knew that I had a multitude of issues. I would have as much as a hot cross bun or a blueberry and have to go into the emergency department, and they'd have to take me into surgery to remove it. And I had no idea really why. They just told me that my food pipe doesn't talk to, the top part doesn't talk to the bottom part. But to have that explanation more recently, it really validated what I'd been experiencing my entire life, because no one really believed that it was as bad as what I'd been experiencing, and I never really complained about it because I never knew any different.
So did they just not realize that they'd done that during the surgery, and then they just figured that out 2 years ago?
I think so. Like, I'm not sure if they didn't realize it or if it was just the way that it was. But from connecting with other people with Vactril, it seems like when you repair things like what I had, you're basically creating a food pipe that's not functional a lot of the time. But it's what you have to do to survive. And I think that it sounds really scary to parents if you're going to have a child that's not going to have a functional food pipe. But really, it's okay. Like, I've lived my whole life like this and I'm okay. So
yeah, you just kind of get used to it, right?
Absolutely.
So you do so many things. Can you briefly run us through what you do, and then we'll start talking about the modeling, which is what we're going to talk about today. But yeah, you really do wear a lot of hats.
I do. I'll try to remember them all. So the modeling is one. So I'll park that for the moment. So I am a social entrepreneur. I run my own business called Champion Health Agency, along with some other ventures actually at the moment, which is pretty exciting. I'm also a speaker. I started speaking internationally in 2018, which is really exciting. I'm an author. I wrote my own book also in 2018. It was a huge year. And God, what else do I do? I'm actually a counselor, a qualified counselor.
Oh, really?
Yes, I am.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And I swear a few other things, but they're all slipping my mind now. But mainly, I just put them all under the banner of a disability advocate, because that's what I'm really passionate about. I'm passionate about creating social change.
So, how old were you when you got into modeling, and what made you want to get into modeling?
It's a little bit of a complicated story because I think I always was one of those young children that would dress up and like having my photo taken and wear those tiny little plastic heels with the little feather straps over the top that you could buy in, like Target or Big W when you're a kid, and the big puppy princess dresses. So I was one of those like little girls. And as I grew up, I did really like the idea of modeling, but I'd never taken it fully seriously, I guess, until my mother decided I wasn't ladylike enough. And she decided that she wanted to send me to deportment school where I could learn how to speak like a lady and sit like a lady and dress like a lady and all, all the bits and pieces. And I compromised with her that it would be a modeling and deportment school. So I did this course, and it was awesome. And I realized that the modeling industry was so much more than what I thought it was. And being a model was an actual profession. It wasn't just a person that, gets in front of a camera and you have a few photos taken or walks down a runway. Like there was a lot more to it. And that really intrigued me and interested me. So I decided that I wanted to do it. I ended up meeting with a modeling agency and it went really well. And they seemed to like me and they wanted to sign me and were starting to organize a portfolio shoot. And they just asked by chance, do you have any scars? And I said, yeah, I was proud. So I lifted up my shirt, showed them the scars that I had on my stomach from my previous surgeries. And they just said, look, I'm really sorry, but you're not going to be able to model with those scars, or you're never going to be able to show your stomach modeling with those scars. And we had a discussion about why. And they said, even when you're modeling for companies where you will be fully dressed, you cast for those companies wearing a bikini. And to walk in a casting wearing a bikini when you've got those scars, like no one's going to hire you, And I basically left that and I was like, I'm not going to their portfolio shoot. Like, I'm not meeting with them again because this is ridiculous. I'd never really felt ashamed of my scars before, so I didn't want to, I guess, interact with that. So I took a bit of a step back. I decided I wanted to do more kind of fashion work. So I started learning how to sew and bead things and all of that. And I was pretty pathetic. Like I could bead something in about, 3 months. But from that, I developed like this little kind of collection, and had a little fashion party with some of my friends and got my boyfriend at the time to take photos of me in like a little lookbook for it. And it turned out that, it was probably about 6 months after, a year after that initial meeting, that there was a casting that popped up for this boutique modeling agency in Brisbane. So I went along, brought my little portfolio from that lookbook with me, and I had to walk in my bikini. I put concealer over my scars because I thought, screw them. I'm so much more than my scars, but they're not going to see them. And you could still see them. They still knew that I had scars. But I ended up getting signed by this modeling agency and getting a 3-month development contract. And that's where it really kicked off for me.
So, I guess you didn't really realize like how hard it would be to get into modeling with a disability, or that it would even be a problem at all.
No, I was pretty clueless, to be honest. And what I skipped in that story was that after I got rejected by that first modeling agency, I thought, screw them, they don't know anything about the industry, which was silly of me. And I started just sending my bikini photos to other agencies, and I just got rejection after rejection after rejection. And that might be because of my scars, or it might just be because they didn't like my look, honestly. And it was at a time where diversity and inclusion was starting to become part of the modeling agenda. And it might not have been diversity and inclusion in terms of people with disabilities or scars, but I thought that they were at least at a stage where they would take a photo of someone with scars and they'd Photoshop them out. And I thought it was sad that they wouldn't put enough investment into me to Photoshop my scars out.
Yeah. And your disability is pretty much like invisible, right? Except for the scars. Do you think it would have been easier or harder to get into the modeling industry if you'd had like more of a visible disability? Like if you'd had a limb deficiency, if you were in a wheelchair, do you think that would have been easier to get in or harder?
I think at that time it would have been harder, honestly, because I think then they were looking at diversity in terms of ethnicity. to be really honest with you. And they weren't really at the stage, this was back in 2015, of actually accepting people that are very like visibly different, like they're in a wheelchair, or they have a limb difference, or they have, bigger scars than what I had. But now I think that it probably would have been easier if I, did have a more visible disability, because what I find now is that I am stuck in this weird middle ground where I don't really fit into the box of being a disabled model because I don't look like I have a visible disability, but I don't fit into the box of not necessarily being, an able-bodied model, if that's what you want to call it. Was like I have scars and I'm an advocate like for disability. So it's an interesting place to be.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common just with invisible disabilities in the first place. Like you're disabled, but you don't look disabled enough for most people to count you as being disabled. But I guess then there's problems with the other way, right? Like, if your disability is visible, you might get judged for other reasons. So I don't think either way you really win, right? It's just cons on both sides.
Absolutely.
So there is a lot more diversity now, which is great. But do you think there's a bit of tokenism with brands hiring disabled models nowadays? And do you think some brands are just doing it to kind of tick a box and not actually doing it for the right reasons?
Absolutely. And it is so frustrating for many reasons. I think you rarely see someone or more than one person with a disability on the catwalk unless it's, a full show where everyone has a disability and it's, an adaptive fashion label. And I think that when you have one person from a diverse background, whether they have a disability or, they're from a different ethnic background, it's tokenism, because what a lot of the labels expect is they expect them to not be there as just the model, but they expect them to be there as this, diversity icon. And what comes with that is a huge amount of advocacy. You'll see like a fashion piece being like, oh, this label had, someone in a wheelchair, like in their fashion show. And then you'll probably see a quote from them saying like, I'm so grateful that they finally had me in their show, or whatever else. They're not paid there, like they're not there to be paid as an advocate. They're there paid the same amount, if they're lucky, as everyone else to be a model. But they have this whole weight of being an advocate at the exact same time, and it's not fair. I think if they're going to be so tokenistic that they're going to have one person that's diverse in their runway, they should be paying them to be the advocate for that at the same time. Because otherwise I think it's just completely unfair.
And do you get hired more as a disabled model now?
I have stepped back more than what I was doing, and a lot of the work that I did do as a model was actually not as a disabled model. No one knew that I had a disability because I was so determined to not be that token. I didn't want people to hire me because they felt sorry for me or because they wanted to use me to leverage their platform. I wanted to use that experience to leverage my story when I was going to be able to come back and tell my story to my communities. And so now, I guess, being a disability advocate, like there are opportunities where I'm able to be hired. But yeah, I think it's different, because when they're looking for a disabled model, they usually hire someone that you can see that at first sight, and you still can't.
And how do you go? Like, what are the challenges you face with modeling with a disability? Walking a runway, doing a photo shoot, what are like the limitations or challenges that your disability causes you?
I think the biggest challenge is that the modeling environment still isn't really accessible, to be very honest. And a lot of, the runway shows, you'll have like a full day of fittings where you're expected to be on your feet almost the entire day. You'll be there the entire day. It's probably going to be hot. You're going to be surrounded by other people. You're going to be in ridiculously high heels. And like I said, I faint, I get exhausted, I'm in pain a lot of the time, and my body just can't really handle it anymore. And same with, runway call times. A lot of the time, you're not given much food, you're not given much water. Like, yes, you can bring your own, but there aren't that many environments to consume it, really. sometimes there aren't chairs, you have to sit on the floor places, and it's not, professional to sit on the floor, but you kind of do it anyway. Um, Photo shoots, you're behind big bright lights that are hot. There have been countless times that I've just dropped to the ground, and there was one that was so memorable when I was overseas that I don't even really know what happened, but I just dropped to the ground. Like I just couldn't stand up anymore because I was having to stand still in one place for a while. Um, and the casting directors just came, they got me up off the floor and they gave me a sugar pill because they were so used to the girls there starving themselves that they thought, she must just be starving herself, and gave me some sugar and hope that I'd be okay. And I just dropped to the floor again. So yeah, it was difficult. I didn't want to sacrifice my body for it anymore.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's not really much thought for people in general, but especially disabled people, and that there's virtually like no accessibility.
Yeah, I think so. And I think in some ways it gets better for some people. Like I've been at runways where there has been, a model that has a disability, and they would be given, a private change room and their own dresser and their own XYZ, whatever they wanted. But because I was there as someone that, didn't have a disability or didn't disclose my disability, I wasn't given any accommodation. So I think it is also about what you ask for. But I think in general, every model should be given what they need to be in a safe working environment, and that's not usually the case.
Yeah, I mean, everyone should be offered the chance for accessibility without having to disclose that they need that accessibility. Like, I don't think you should have to give people your entire medical history just to get something very basic. And that's probably considered more of like a human right than anything.
And I think that the modeling industry is so competitive because there are millions of gorgeous girls out there, and there are millions of people who will do a job for free. Um, And so you don't want to ask for things to make you seem like you're difficult or like they have to go out of their way for you. So you don't usually ask for what you need. You're not going to ask for a chair. You're not going to ask for water. You're not going to ask for a support person. And there were so many times that I didn't ask for what I needed because I didn't want to seem like I was difficult, or I didn't want to lose the job over someone that didn't need what I needed. And I suffered as a result. And if I went back and did it now, it would probably be different. But I think the difference would be that I wouldn't have got the jobs.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Like, as someone, I mean, now that I'm older, I do tend to say what I need and I don't really care what other people think. And yeah, it doesn't go well most of the time. And I'm fine. I can part ways with that. That's fine. Um, but a lot of people don't have that opportunity. Like, if that's what you're really trying to do, if you need that money, if that's your dream job, you can't just be asking for what you need and then getting fired or let go and having someone else like chosen over you.
Yeah, and I think that even though now I feel like I'm, older and I'm a stronger advocate and all of that, and I'm getting better at asking for what I need, I still have so many moments where I don't advocate for myself. Like I will advocate for anyone else all the time. But even recently, I traveled interstate for a speaking engagement, and I had a support worker with me for the first time, finally, because I needed them, and I actually had the balls to ask for them to travel with me, which was great. But on the flights, even though our flights were booked together, we weren't sitting next to each other on the flight. They were right down the front, I was right down the back, and I didn't just ask the airline to put us together. And then, when we were booked into the hotel, we were put on completely different levels. And I didn't just ask the hotel to put us on the same level, because ultimately, if anything happened, there was no way that I could access them. There was no way that they could access me. And when I was thinking about it, I thought, it's actually my fault because I didn't ask. And I can't really blame them that they just didn't do it automatically, because I should have just asked.
So you wouldn't say that like modeling is necessarily like helping you with your disability then? Maybe it's kind of doing the opposite.
No, I think, modeling serves a lot of great purposes, but what I realized through my career progression, because I really started off my own personal advocacy journey in modeling, in a really unique way, in that I wanted my community to be represented. I wanted parents of babies like me to know that there was someone that I guess could bring them hope, that it could be okay, because I'd always grown up with my parents saying to me, if I'd just seen you at 5 years old, I would have relaxed more because we thought you were going to die. We thought your life was over, and then if we had just seen you at 10, if we'd seen you at 15. So I wanted to be that person that people could look to. So that was my own individual way of advocacy. But what I got really tired of was just being seen and never being heard, and constantly being criticized for how I look, and people never really recognizing or acknowledging the story behind, or what I'd been through or what I'd gone through to get there. And there were so many times that, I'd gone through absolute hell and back the same day of a shoot or the same day of a runway, that I'd almost gone to the ED before being dropped off at a shoot, or that I'd gone to the ED straight from a shoot. And no one ever knew, and no one ever understood. And I just became an expert at, putting up the facade and looking like everything was perfectly fine. And it wasn't. And I actually started to want to be heard. That representation wasn't enough. Like, I wanted a seat at the tables, and I wanted a voice.
I love that. You are really such a strong voice. Honestly, you are. What advice would you give to someone who did want to get into modeling?
I think for people wanting to get into modeling, I think you really need to ask yourself why. And that's probably not the advice that people want to hear. They probably just want to hear, go for it, you're gorgeous, like just do it. And that is part of my advice, because everyone's gorgeous, like everyone should be represented. And modeling honestly has nothing to do with what you look like at all, ever, seriously. But I think you really need to ask yourself why you want to do it, and if the goals that you want to achieve are achievable through modeling, and if it's genuine, and if it's the environment that you want to be in, and if it's healthy for you, really. Because there were a lot of things that modeling taught me, and I'm incredibly grateful for it, and I hope to continue doing it. But there were a lot of other ways that I could have learned the lessons, I think, in a less painful way.
How would you recommend that they advocate for themselves so maybe they don't end up in the same position that you did?
I think it's really important to know who you are and what you need, and ask for what you need, because you know yourself better than anyone else. And you need to have like a safe working environment just like anyone else. So if you're going to a shoot or going to a runway, how can you make sure that it's a safe environment for you? Do you need a support person? Do you need 3 liters of water with you? Do you need food? Do you need to have breaks? Ask for it, because if they want to have diverse talent, or if they want to have anyone, whether you have a disability or not, they need to make accommodations to have you there. If they value you, they'll have you there, and they'll make those accommodations. And if they don't value you enough, so you shouldn't waste your time. It's just not worth it otherwise, and it's not worth sacrificing your body or your health for.
I really love that. I know it's not like maybe necessarily the term we thought the conversation would go, but I love the honesty, and I think it's important, especially if you do want to get into modeling, you do need to know the truth.
I think so. And I think there's so many things that are beautiful about modeling. Like, I've had incredible experiences, and I've met the most amazing people, because the people that you meet in the modeling industry a lot of the time are the people that have been told no over and over and over again. The people who've said, you're never going to make it as a model, or you're never going to make it as a makeup artist, or ha ha ha, photography. Like, are you serious? You're not going to make it as a photographer. But these are the people that have kept pushing through and have kept going. And they're incredible, talented, beautiful people. And it is a wonderful industry in many ways, but in other ways it isn't at times. So you just need to choose the right jobs, the right people, and you can have an incredible experience.
Thank you so much, Anja. This has honestly been so interesting and so great. What's your next big thing that you're working on or that you want to do?
I think my next big thing is next year, and actually going to move Champion Health Agency into a not-for-profit.
Yeah, wow.
So yeah, so you're hearing it first here. I'm incredibly excited because I have all of these really big dreams for things that I want to do. And in the social enterprise structure as a company, it's just not possible. And I just have this grand dream of being able to partner with a range of sponsors and have like a champion holiday where people I represent and whoever else wants to come along, we can go to some exotic location or a cruise ship or something. I mean, just have a good time, but also look at the accessibility of it. And, maybe have some speakers speak on the cruise ship or whatever else. That's my absolute dream because I need a holiday and I cannot imagine a better group of people to holiday with than my champions. So you better be
Yeah, I mean, I'm up for coming on a cruise.
good. I've never been on one before, so if it's terrible.
So where can we find you?
Instagram, at Anja Christoffersen, and LinkedIn is my new favorite form of social media. Which is, yeah, kind of embarrassing, but yeah, just Anja Christoffersen on LinkedIn if you want to venture into that domain.
And if someone was interested in Champion Health Agency, what should they do?
Check out our website, which is www.championhealthagency.com, or check us out on Instagram, which is at Champion Health Agency. And if you want to come on the cruise or know someone that wants to sponsor a cruise, send me an email or an Instagram DM's better. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for being the first guest. Honestly, couldn't have been anyone better.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Sorry, it went a bit of a different direction, but it's been awesome.
No, that's good though. That's good because I didn't really know anything about the topic. And I'm sure there's a lot of other people who don't know a ton about the topic. So that's why I chose it. Something a little bit different. And I think it's been a good discussion.
Yeah, I think so. I think modeling can be so glorified, but it's important to know that there are many sides to every story.
I hope you enjoyed the first episode. Don't forget to subscribe to continue getting our episodes, and you can find us on Facebook at Sick of It Podcast and Instagram at sickofit_podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you again next week.